As you'll recall, if you've read Chapter 2 already, which I hope you've done, the basic building blocks of visual art are line, shape, or sometimes referred to as form, color, and texture. Those four basic elements are always there. They're the manipulables. They're the basic building blocks that the artist uses, varies their use of them to create the image or to make the communication that he or she wants. So in this painting, for example, if you were to look at this and describe it for me, which I ask you to do in your unit work, as well as your outside arts events essay, you can talk about perhaps the jagged lines, the non-parallel lines, the fact that they are broken in places, they are straight, there are straight lines, there are heavy curved lines, and this gives a very, very different feeling than if the lines were thin, or if they were all wavy in another artist's work, or if they weren't thick, or if they weren't even there and they were just inferred lines by the form. I'll try to give you a little more demonstration of that in just a minute, but I can only talk about one painting at a time. So we have line, we have shape or form. None of the forms in this painting are geometrical. None are squares, none are solid triangles, none are solid circles or ovals. They are organic or non-geometric shapes. Because, of course, this is a somewhat realistic painting of a picture of nature, a nature scene, and we don't have firm geometric shapes in nature, do we? There's not a single one on my body, and I'm nature. So we can talk about this painting in terms of the line choice and the shape or form choices. And how about the color? There aren't a lot of colors in this painting, are they? There are just variations of maybe 3, green, white, black, and brown. I can't see any, maybe there's a little bit of yellow, I guess, in there, depending on how you can see this with a video. But on the palette that the artist uses, that thing that he or she puts the paint on, sometimes it's made out of wood and sometimes it's made out of acrylic, he or she has mixed just these basic colors to get the effect. So the effect is a rainy day, evening, I don't think it's early morning, it just doesn't look like that to me. Very different effect if this were done with bright colors and sunshine coming through and maybe spots of flowers or fishermen and with bright colors. Very, very different mood as a result of the color, the shape or form, and the line. Now, this is a watercolor. So if you look really closely, unless you're a teeny-weeny bug, you can't see any real texture. It's called implied texture. So with the roughness of these rocks, from dark to shade, the scratchy brush strokes of these trees, there's an implied texture in this. And we really do get the feeling of a forest, running water, bumpy rocks, and so forth with implied texture. So the 4 basic building blocks, you'll see them in every single 2-dimensional work. They have to be there. You can talk about the line, the shape form, the color, and the texture. You can also talk about the media. And this is watercolor. It has a very different feel. Some of the other works are going to look like, including the cattle marker or oil stick painting in just a minute. By the way, in A Gallery Worth Its Salt, you will find on the bottom or to the side a name of the painting, oftentimes the date, I don't see it here, and oftentimes the media. You might even find as you walk into the gallery or on a poster near the door, an explanation, a statement by the artist. But that's rather infrequent. Most artists don't give you an explanation. They say, that's your job. You're the one that sees what you see. That was my communication. And that's a lot what this course is about, is you looking at a film, listening to music, whatever the case may be, and saying, this is what I read out of that. Not what I read, not trying to figure out what Ulrich wants, but what you see and interpret from that work. Well, what we're looking at right now is this large painting. You can even talk about the scale of paintings, because a painting this teeny-weeny compared to a great big wall-sized painting like Jackson Pollock's, that'll be in Chapter 1, of your textbook have a very, very different effect on the viewer. If they're big, you oftentimes have to step back. This is a cattle marker, no, excuse me, an oil stick painting. They kind of look the same on canvas by Ginny DeWeese, and it was made in 202. It's called From the Deck. By the way, most of the work in this room is in these gallery of ours, in this one particular room, are by Montana artists. We have the exception with Ansel Adams and with Edward Curtis, even though they did do close to Montana or Montana imagery, photographs. So again, let's go through the building blocks and just answer the questions yourself. So describe in your head the use of line, the choices of line that the artist made in this work. We have, I guess I'll answer for you. We have parallel and repetitious line. We have heavy lines, we have thin lines. But just like this is mostly nature, the lines are not geometric, neither are the forms or the shapes. Here, this is not really nature, I guess. It's human built, so we get these parallel, straight, geometric shapes and lines. So I just covered that for you, line and shape. We have very different color. How would you describe it as compared to the last work that we just saw? And we don't just have implied texture, we have actual texture. If you get close up to it, you can see that, if you got close to it, you can see that like oil paint, oil markers or cattle markers can be blobbed on, and they have a very different effect because you're actually seeing the real light and shadow in there. And that leads me to beyond the 4 building blocks that are always there, that are the manipulables of a 2D visual artist. They're always there to talk about. Something called principles are choices by the author, by the artist. Let me see if there's one here. Well, what we have here is the principle of repetition. We have the repetition of these same shapes and forms. We have repetition of this bright splotches of red. We have repetitions of these same bright colors of yellow. And that's a choice that the artist has made. These are the same yellows and the same reds. And I think this maybe the effect on me is that it's kind of a glowy effect, if you will. This is very, very different than the repetition of those colors and those shapes and forms in the last work that we saw. We have the repetition of these somewhat straight lines of the trees, and they are in high contrast. Again, now, these are all what we call principles of visual arts. They may be there or they may not be there. The repetition, and also there's something called balance in this painting. If you cut it right down the middle, the colors and the forms and the lines are almost equal, not quite, but almost equally balanced in the painting. That gives it perhaps a feeling of peace, of solidness, of rest, because it's balanced. The teeter-totter is balanced as she's looking off the deck. These are probably the most valuable pieces that we have in our small museum, in our small collection. And these are original pen and ink drawings by Charlie Russell for the novel The Virginian. These were purchased by a class of, I believe, 1902, and we found them up in an attic of an old building, people not recognizing their value or their beauty, and they're quite beautiful. Very limited media. I mean, that's it, pen and ink on paper. They're now, I believe, under glass. I can't touch them. Yes, they're under glass to protect them, but we could really take a good look at them if they were just pen and ink, which is the way pen and ink is often displayed. So these are drawing. That's the method and material. Pen and ink on, it looks like very smooth paper. And Russell has done this totally with the variation in lines. These are hash marks. These are some curved lines, the curve of the body and the curve of the hat and so forth, but basically whack, 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 right? So that was his choice, and it has a very, very different effect on you if he would choose then to color this over with watercolor, which he sometimes did. You can see these really dinky little illustrations on some of his preserved letters in museums around the world. He wrote letters, and often his little trademark was to put a little drawing of himself and then watercolor it in. But there's a very different feeling of this, perhaps quiet, perhaps distance, and the simplicity of just that media and just the media and the way he worked it with lines. The lines create the shapes and the forms, okay, but no color, virtually no color. Well, yes, virtually no color, and very smooth texture. Implied texture with the hashes that he made with the horses and the hashes that he makes on the men's clothes. These are rough guys. I mean, they've been out working. There are some principles that he chose to use that you could talk about here. Now, this is a $20 word for you, so you can impress your friends and neighbors. But one in your textbook, it's called chiaroscuro in the Italian. And basically what it means is the illusion of light and shade. Now, if you're really looking at my face here for a minute, this is reality, light and shade. You can tell where the light source is, can't you? And you can tell where the shadows are on my face because it's darker, and on my body, on my clothing, and so forth. Russell chose to create that illusion by making the hash marks closer together and creating shadow. And the light source, it seems to me, is right there. Sun lower in the sky. Maybe in Montana that would be about 5 o'clock these days. And he also chose the principle of linear perspective, not just to give it this three-dimensional quality, but three-dimensional also by having a vanishing point. This is not a floating mountain. You know that it's a mountain in the distance. It's not a dinky mountain. It's a big mountain, but it's in the distance because an illusionary vanishing point is created to make this a relatively realistic piece of artwork. Not completely, because there's no color, and we don't have quite the detail that you would in a highly realistic work, but this is somewhat realistic. Again, those 4 building blocks, always there, but he chose to create chiaroscuro, or the illusion of light and shade, and use linear perspective. He also uses balance, doesn't he? Strong focal point. This is a hand-drawn lithograph by Monty Dolak of Montana. It was done in 2001, and it's called Moonlight Rainbows. Now, Monty Dolak is probably the most well-known through the general population living Montana artist. He makes all sorts of things that can be replicated, all sorts of prints that can be replicated. You can purchase them for $5 on coffee mugs. You can purchase limited prints of these originals, and he's got a wonderful gallery online as well as a gallery that sells his work online, and a wonderful gallery that not just shows but sells in Missoula. If you can ever stop in there. He's incredibly popular, again, with the general populace as well as with the art world around Montana and really around the world now. This is a textbook example of plano linear perspective. You can see that, the vanishing point right there. That's not a miniature mountain, and these aren't miniature trees. These are further away. It's just an illusion to give it some sense of realism. You can also see a bit of what we call chiaroscuro here. Well, the best example is in the waves. These waves are closer to the light source, and it looks like the light source is up here somewhere. And of course, this gives you the feeling of the rolling waves because it's darker. This isn't just, multicolored water. It's to give you that illusion of three-dimensionality. Would you call this painting realistic? Well, in many ways you can. The color of the fish, perhaps. The illusion of darkness as the day grows longer. But why is it non-realistic? Well, look at the impossibility of that triangular form. Oftentimes portraits are done this way. Portraits of George Washington, kings, and the Madonna, and Mona Lisa, and so forth. Their head is right here, and their shoulders are right there. You'd think it was pretty odd if their portrait was done like this over in the corner. And that, of course, is impossible in nature, as is the repetitious size of all these fish. So maybe it's the illusion of one fish, one glorious, unrealistic, almost impossible fish of your dreams, being shown at the same time, all those different patterns of the leaps that it makes.